Joining us now, as promised, the ranking member on House Intelligence, Congressman Jim Himes. I want to start where Mark just left off, which is that Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI, and you know this from confirmation hearings or from just having to have oversight over her and having conversations about her assessment of intelligence over the years. He's saying that she sees things differently than most intelligence offices, the community. If she's in control of the presidential daily brief, what do you have concerns? And if you do, what are those concerns?
Yeah, well, those concerns are kind of encapsulated in this whole story, right? And let me back up away from all of the kind of oily looking stuff associated with the firing of two professionals who produced a report which was at odds with what the president, what Tulsi Gabbard were saying. You just put up a tweet, I think it was a tweet, that had this statement that this is yet another example of people inside the intelligence community who are not consistent, I can't remember the wording, with the policies of the president. That makes absolutely no sense. And it's really important that people understand that the intelligence community is not a policy body. It's not like the State Department, which may say, hey, you ought to negotiate a deal with Russia or not. The intelligence community is not a policy body. They have one job and one job only, and that is to provide the very best intelligence conclusions and analysis to policy makers, to the president and to others, right? So the idea that somebody inside this organization whose sole purpose is to provide information is at odds with the policy of the president just makes absolutely no sense. Yeah. And what worries me here, to answer your question very specifically, first of all, it's not clear to me how much the president actually either looks at or is moved by the president's daily brief. But if the DNI is intercepting the conclusions of this $90 billion operation we have to try to provide the best information to the president and putting a slant on it the way she did with the Venezuela Tren de Aragua thing, this country becomes a lot less safe than it should be.
Is this going to affect the intelligence that you get as a member of the Gang of Eight?
Well, it could, right? I mean, this is the other big worry. The other big worry is two individuals, lifelong intelligence professionals were fired. Now, I've asked the DNI for the reason for that. And I would note that ordinarily when people of that seniority are fired, my committee should be informed. We learned about this on Fox News. Okay, no reason has been given other than this vague accusation of, weaponizing or politicizing. Imagine what every other senior person in the intelligence community is thinking if it doesn't turn out that these two individuals were fired for a good reason. The message comes through loud and clear, which is that if you produce information that is at odds with the things that the president says or believes, you will lose your job. And these are enormously good people, but they're people, right? And so at worst, this looks like it could be an attempt to really shape the information that gets to the president. And that's a very, very dangerous world.
I'm going to go broad. I wonder if you think we're safe right now. And I ask that because we've seen some really galling or worrisome security breaches or lapses with this administration. You have Hegseth, the defense secretary, sharing war or attack plans over signal. I mean, that we know of. There could be other things that we don't know of. You have the president of the United States who seems pretty happy and content to accept a plane from a foreign nation. No strings attached, he says. I think that's questionable. You have this director of national intelligence taking over the presidential daily brief as you're talking about allegations that two people who didn't align with the president's policies were fired. And now this looming threat that if you don't get in line on the political agenda with this administration and tailor your information to that agenda, then you're going to be fired. Are we in a situation where we're at risk of missing something serious that might put, individual lives in danger here in the country?
I mean, the answer to that question is yes, right? I mean, let me put you into two pairs of shoes. Imagine the analyst right now at CIA. Maybe that analyst is an African-American woman, right? And she sees the war on DEI. And she says, now in the hallways, do people look at me and say, I'm a DEI hire, I'm an affirmative action hire? She may have the confidence to say, no, I'm not. But she's thinking about that rather than thinking about, the terrorist groups that it is her job to cover, or the missiles in North Korea that she's supposed to watch. General Tim Hawk, superb commander, of Cyber Command and director of the NSA, apparently fired because Laura Loomer, and again, we don't have good reasons yet for that firing, which was weeks ago, apparently fired because Laura Loomer didn't like it. Again, imagine what these people who have dedicated their lives to keeping us safe are thinking if their job is at risk because Laura Loomer walks into the Oval Office and says, I don't like that guy. So there's that category of people. Then imagine that you're a terrorist. Imagine that you're a terrorist and you say to yourself, wow, Pete Hegseth, who put operational plans for an attack on Yemen onto an unsecure signal chat, is at the Pentagon. You've got these ongoing scandals at the DNI about firing people who provide information. Do I think this is a worse time or a better time to try to conduct an attack on the United States? My guess is when they look at this chaos and they look at this politicization, the answer is this is a better time than we have seen for a while to undertake an attack.
Is this concern shared by your colleagues, your Republican colleagues?
So, I mean, sadly, my Republican colleagues here remain a wholly owned subsidiary of Donald J. Trump, right? So they're not interested in the tough questions at all. Because it puts their head above the parapet. And again, remember what happens to people who espouse views separate from the president's. They get fired. In this case, they would get primaried. And so, no, half the Congress, the majority, the narrow majority in both the House and the Senate, have no interest in really getting involved in any of this stuff, including crazy things like a 747 being donated for the president to fly around in moments of crisis. I think this will change, but right now, the Republicans in the House and the Senate are wholly owned subsidiaries of Donald J. Trump.
Everyone's talked initially about the ethics of the plane. They're still talking about the ethics of the plane. Fine. I think somebody said this correctly. You knew it was a snake you knew I was a snake when you let me in, calling back to Donald Trump reading the snake at his rallies. I think what interests me more and what concerns me more and has concerned me more is just the security issue with this plane. The idea that we're going to take a plane from anybody, friend, foe, and just fly the president around in it. Seems a bit crazy. All right, Congressman Jim Himes, I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Katie.